Hey y'all, loud little ducky. We are back and talking about the Karen Reed case, Commonwealth versus Karen Reed, and looking to find justice for John O'Keefe and the truth in what really happened. That is what we ultimately want to look for and get when we do these cases and bring some justice to the deceased. And who better to help us get to that truth than the person that did the autopsy? And in this case, we have Dr. Irene Scordi Bello. She was called in the first trial, and we didn't know if she was going to be called in trial 2. There were rumors that Hank Brennan was not going to call her, that he just wanted to use the neurosurgeon. And I thought there's because the medical examiner is actually not good for the Commonwealth case. Um, Usually they're great for the prosecution case, but in this one, they are not. So, um, people thought they don't want to call her, they don't want to use her because they don't like what she's going to have to say. Is that the reason that they haven't called this other neuropathologist or neuroforensic pathologist or whoever that helped Dr. Scordi Bello, which was Dr. Stonebridge or Stonewater? I'm bad with names. She she was a really cute girl last year. Dr. Stonebridge. She's also from the chief medical examiner's office. She last year had long hair. I think it was colored, and then she wore a sleeveless like shirt, and then had like tattoo sleeves basically on her. Don't know how people took her, but the Commonwealth has decided thus far not to use her this year. That they brought in a different neuro person, a neurosurgeon this time. But to me, the Commonwealth always had to use the medical examiner because, well, everybody is concluding that John O'Keefe is dead. You actually have to prove that he died. And maybe they could get into it with like the ER doctor or whoever pronounced him deceased. Maybe they could bring him in to prove that John O'Keefe is actually dead, like everybody says. But to me, I think you have to prove that. I don't know that you can just say it and it's true. Um, so to me, they have to prove that someone died, which means you need to bring in someone to say John O'Keefe has died. And if you bring in somebody that is doing the autopsy on that person is dead, um, deceased. Maybe they could have called in the person that, like I said, that called his death at the hospital. But this is why I think they always had to call her, and they were just going to have to deal with things that she says that the death of John O'Keefe is undetermined. So, getting into that, Hank Brennan does her direct, and they get into talking about, and she says that she consulted with a toxologist, toxicologist, I don't know, I can pronounce that, neuropathologist and a cardiac pathologist. Um, Explains that cause of death is the disease or injury that initiates a sequence of events that ultimately leads to someone's death. The manner of death is the circumstances that lead to death, and it can be natural, accident, homicide, unaliving, or undetermined. And in this case, we knew it wasn't natural. We knew it wasn't an unaliving. So that left us with three: accident, homicide, undetermined. Since she can't determine whether it was an accident or a homicide, it is undetermined. She can't decide what happened. She cannot say that this was an accident of John O'Keefe's own doing, or if it was an accident that caused his death, but it was still ended up being like manslaughter or homicide. And she cannot say that he died due to at the hands of somebody else, which is what homicide is at the hands of somebody else, whether it was intentional or neglect, reckless, whatever. So we get undetermined in this case. And that when she does the autopsy, after examining the body during the autopsy, she writes notes during the autopsy, takes photographs when she's doing everything contemporaneously, and then she tries to, for their facility, get out a report within 90 days by taking all of her notes and all of her photographs and putting it into a finalized report. After getting the stuff from the toxicologist, the neuropathologist, the cardiac pathologist, takes into consideration the stuff from the police, the stuff from the hospital, and everything that she examined herself into figuring this out, puts it all in a nice little neat report, ties it up with a bow. She examined John O'Keefe on January 31st, 2022. So she got to John O'Keefe's body quicker than they got to Karen Reed's examination of her car. They did not measure the depth of the scratches or lacerations on the arm because they were superficial, which some people are like, what do you mean they're superficial? Those look deep. Superficial is just like on this surface level skin. It didn't go like deeper, like really deep into the skin. It didn't go through any tissue or anything like that. It was just this surface level, like top layer of skin. Um, it would probably left scars, but a a simple scratch can leave scars depending on how it heals. But they did not measure, like they didn't stick anything in there to measure them because she says there really wasn't a depth enough to, like, be like, "Oh, this is, like, 16th, um, a 16th of a centimeter, deep." They didn't do that. Um, she does not know what caused the bruise on the back of John O'Keefe's hand. Um, there is a cut, um, or a bradle on his eyelid or eye, and there is a small scratch on the knee on the outside, and it is circular. She says that the fourth and fifth rib near the sternum, right in here, The ribs here are broken, which is usually caused by CPR. Those are the ribs when you're doing CPR that usually with the compressions break. If you're doing CPR correctly, usually you will have that. Um, she did observations of the brain. She did do a detailed analysis of the brain. She determined there was blunt force to the back of the head and the skull and hypothermia, which was the cause of death, and that the manner of death was undetermined. So that is what Hank Brennan did on direct. Very short. This witness took a lot longer last year, but Lally takes a lot longer than Hank Brennan on most witnesses. So Robert Alessi gets up on cross and they talk about manner. And she says, there wasn't, he says, there wasn't a reasonable way to determine one manner of death over another manner of death. She agrees with that. She said that she get info about the investigation from the police department um, and or the district attorney's office. She considered the medical history of John O'Keefe. She considered the scene info. She considered witness statements. And then Robert Alessi asks her about a neurologist or a cardiologist, like a neurosurgeon, if they should perform autopsies or be able to opine about autopsies. And she kind of laughs and is like, no, like, I don't think they have the certifications or the education to be able to do that. Like, she kind of thought that was funny that a neurologist or cardiologist or a neurosurgeon would try to be a person that deals with the autopsy and can classify these things. And the reason Robert Alessi brought that up is because the Commonwealth is going to have a neurosurgeon get up and talk about the injuries to John O'Keefe. He's an interesting witness. Wait until you hear his testimony. He was interesting. All right. So they then go to Proctor, talk to the ME's office, and thought it was a collision. And then there's this picture of what looks to be Proctor and Connor O'Keefe, not Connor O'Keefe, just Connor Keefe, no relation. Connor Keefe. They're both troopers of MSP, or at the time they were both troopers. Proctor is no longer a trooper. And they're at the Cape Cod office morgue. Now, John O'Keefe was at the Cape Cod office, and that is where Dr. Scordi Bello did her autopsy of John O'Keefe at. She's not usually in that office. She's usually in a different office, but they needed somebody to fill in or they were short-staffed or something, so she went and did the autopsy there. And so what is interesting about this is this picture, we don't know where this picture came from, but and it is labeled Proctor and Keefe at autopsy or something like that. And it's interesting because Connor Keefe, when he testified, said that he was the only one in his unit to go to the autopsy. And was he the only one in his unit? Maybe. Was he the only one there? No. He did not go alone per se, but maybe the guy that went with him wasn't from his unit. That could be the technicality there to be like, "Oh, he's not lying." He also could have misremembered. Like, he might just not know. Um, and this picture, the person that looks like Proctor's head is down. It's a bald head guy, which, I mean, if you remember the first trial, everybody in trial 1 for the Commonwealth that was law enforcement was basically bald. They all just shaved their heads. I don't remember if there was a reason for it or not, but they were all bald. Um, to me, in that picture, it looks like Proctor. We do get clarification the following day that in the picture, it is not it is we do not get I don't know if he says the picture, but he says that the 2 people that were at the autopsy were Trooper Watson and Trooper Keefe, Connor Keefe. Now, I have seen some pictures around social media of what Watson looks like, and to me, I still don't think that that picture is Watson. They can get away with it, them saying that it's Watson because his face isn't shown. And also, apparently, the login or the sign-in sheet for the medical examiner's office, Trooper Proctor did not sign in. It might be Watson. I don't know. It doesn't look like it. If and I've had to look at Trooper Proctor's body and his bald head for over a year. But they are saying it is not Proctor in the picture or there at the autopsy. Proctor was never there, supposedly. I think Proctor's texts contradict that, but we will see if we get into that at a later date. But as of right now, it's been cleared up by stipulation from defense and Commonwealth that Proctor was not there. Um, and the defense should not have had their picture labeled Proctor and Keefe autopsy or whatever. That label should have been redacted. Hank didn't ask for it to be redacted, but the defense knows that that heading shouldn't have been on there. It should have just been the picture itself if they were going to bring it up or tell us when that picture was taken, where was it from, um, and everything like that. But we don't have any of that information. But anyways, back to her cross examination. So then she talks about that Dr. Stonebridge was the neuropathologist for this autopsy. And then and Alessi does that to bring up the fact that the person that was the neuropathologist in this case is not the name that the medical examiner used. Commonwealth's not using her. They're using somebody else. So maybe the jury is like, well, why aren't they using the one that actually looked at the brain or the autopsy? at the medical examiner's office? Why are they using this other dude? I think that was the point of that question. Um, they go into talking about that Dr. Scordi Bello says she saw hypothermic changes to the body. And but you can actually have these hypothermic changes without actually having hypothermia. She still thinks that John O'Keefe had hypothermia. And this is where the defense is going to have to be a little bit careful, because if you want to take one part of her report and say, yes, this is true, like you want this undetermined, he doesn't look like he's been hit by a car thing. So you want to give her credit for that one, but then you want to discredit her later. So she's good enough for this opinion, but she's not good enough for this opinion. You have to be careful, because they're like, why, if you trust her on this, don't you trust her on that? Shouldn't you just trust her or not trust her? So they have to be careful with that. When you want to accept part of what somebody says, but you don't want to accept another part. So she said that she does do differential diagnosis, which are like hypotheticals. Could this be caused by this, or could this be caused by that? But she says that they look like hypothermic changes. Um, she she says that no one provided alternatives for these changes, and she didn't really consider alternate alternative things. Um, so she had no info to consider something back, or they were saying, you could have been given new things and updated this from undetermined to homicide or undetermined to accident at any point. Um, as of April of 2022, but you still have it as undetermined. Um, they asked about John O'Keefe's head injury and saying, could a fall backwards provide this head wound? She says yes. She said, could he have been rendered unconscious immediately? She says, possible. Possibly could be rendered unconscious immediately after hitting the back of his head. Um, then Alessi tries to, I think he's doing it for identification purposes. He might have been trying to admit it, but this part of it gets put in, and it is the physician's report, because the medical examiner said that she took in the information of the physicians that treated him, and the report from the physician from the hospital before he was transferred over. He looked at medical history and things from when he was just at the hospital and what they figured out and what they did to him. So she reads in part of this physician's report. And in this physician's report, she reads, a man walked in a home, was found in a snowbank. There was an altercation or dispute, and then it was objected to. Hank was like, absolutely not. She's not reading this in. And she shouldn't read it in, because that is hearsay. It is the physician writing on paper, and the paper being read by the medical examiner. She can't testify to that. The person that would have to testify to that physician's report is that physician. But it was interesting that that is what the physician put, that he walked into a home, he was found in a snowbank, and there was an altercation or dispute. Nothing about a car accident to the physician that was treating him, at least not in his report. The jury got to hear that. I think they were told to disregard it, but you can't put the toothpaste back into the tube after it's already out. So next they moved into that there was pancreatic hemorrhaging, which can be caused by many things. It can be caused by hypothermia. It could also be caused by a Lucas machine or a Luca machine. Can cause hemorrhaging in the pancreas, which a Luca machine is an automatic CPR machine. Um, she says that something about she's never seen like a Luca machine cause things in the stomach. She says it doesn't cause it in the stomach, and this was on the mucosis inner inner lining of the stomach. They showed a picture of John O'Keefe's stomach. Uh, the juror, it seemed like one of the jurors maybe needed to possibly go throw up or was feeling nauseous after seeing the stomach picture. But they broke and they came back. And then they talk about the part just around the soft tissue and the outside of the stomach. They talk about that a Luca machine. He was on a Luca machine, the automatic CPR machine, for 37 minutes. And that this machine does about 100 compressions per minute. And so you times to get how many compressions that was in 37 minutes, you times 100 compressions by 37, and you get 3,700 total compressions of this CPR machine. They talk about these Winooski ulcers or these Winooski spots. Um, she calls them, um, I believe she said she called them like gastric ulcers or something. I thought I wrote that down. Gastric hemorrhages is what she calls these Winooski ulcers. I know I may not even be pronouncing that right. Um, they talk about usually in hypothermia cases with these gastric hemorrhages or these Wisniewski spots, that usually it is 90% of like the pancreas or the stomach or wherever these are at. Usually you will see 90% of things covered for hypothermia. And then, or you could see up to 90%. There's usually 50% at least when it comes to hypothermic deaths. But there was only, so we're talking about 50 to 90%. There's only 10 to 15% of these Wisniewski spots in John O'Keefe. So 10 to 15 compared to what you normally see at least 50% is quite a difference. So when the defense is trying to say that you want to say that there was hypothermic signs um, or changes, maybe these hypothermic changes weren't enough to actually cause death. Maybe they were starting. Hypothermia might have just been starting, but it shouldn't have been enough to kill him or be his cause of death. She says that there was no frostbite, but he had been left out from 12:30 a.m. to 6 in the morning, and no frostbite apparently with the temperatures that we will discuss with the weatherman. She says that it is not consistent with a car collision. Uh, they then talk about, the laceration on the nose and to either the eyelid or the eye over here. That could not have been, those lacerations could not have come from falling back and hitting the back of his head. And that would have had to come from somewhere else. And a laceration to those areas could have come from possibly a punch. Um, so Brennan gets back up and says, or I think they talk about the totality, says hypothermia, um, due and also due to the reason she knows that is because due to the body being left in the snow, tried to show her the visitor log, and she reads this, and this is another reason why it needed to be cleared up, because here we see that picture that we think is Proctor and Keefe, but then when they show the visitor's log to her on redirect, and Hank Brennan says, "Who does that log say?" Because he says that it doesn't show Proctor, basically. And he's like, "Who does it say attended the autopsy?" And she says, "Mr. Keefe and Mr. Connor." Well, no, that shouldn't be logged as Mr. Keefe and Mr. Connor, because Connor Keefe is one person's name. So before they did that stipulation about, "Oh, that's not Proctor, that's Watson," we were like, did Proctor sign in using one of Keefe's names? Like, Keefe signed in as Keefe, and then maybe Proctor or whoever signed in as Connor? Um, but that was all cleared up later, and we were like, "What?" It just made us very confused, and we didn't find out later about until, like, the next day about any of that stuff. And then Hank Brennan goes through all these things, trying to be like, "Well, you made this conclusion," which you're not supposed to try to impeach your own witness, Brennan. Like, but he wants to be like, "Well, when you ruled this as undetermined, did you know about the statements, 'I hit him, I hit him, I hit him,' and Karen's supposed alleged confessions that everybody says she said?" She said, "Yeah, I knew about those statements." "Well, did you know about this?" "Yes, I knew about that." "Yep, I knew about that. Yep, I knew about that." The only things that she says that she didn't know about was the phone extractions and the data from the phones and maybe the text stream data. But that's not gonna change what she sees on the body. But Brennan wanted to make sure, well, did you consider that somebody admitted to hitting them? You know what Karen Reed didn't admit to? Hitting him with a car. Even if she said, I hit him. Nowhere did she said, I hit him with a car. Maybe she hit him with her fists. Who knows? And people are like, well, it couldn't have been with the fist because she would have had bruised knuckles and also the taillight was broken and things like that. I'm just saying, when you're investigating, you're supposed to look at everything. And at that point, when she said the I hit him statements, they didn't know her taillight was broken. They had found no pieces and they had not seen Karen's Lexus thus far. So they should have questions about, what do you mean you hit him? What did you hit him with? So that part kind of fell a little flat because he was trying to have like a gotcha moment about, oh, if only you would have known about the I hit him statements, you could have realized this was a homicide. And she's like, no, I knew about that when I made my report and findings and tied it up with a bow. And so that is the testimony of the medical examiner, the woman who did the autopsy, and the woman who says, with everything that she knows thus far, she cannot determine what happened to John O'Keefe, which is very important in Alan Jackson's opening. He told the jurors that the medical examiner was told all this information that you're about to hear and examined his body, and she was undetermined, and that the Commonwealth is now going to try to convince you of what they could not convince her of. And she's a medical doctor. And she says that this is not consistent with a car collision or a pedestrian car collision. It's not what you normally see. That is it for this video. We will continue down with this trial. And we also have more videos in the Owens v. Eckerd case coming out as well. So hit that like button, turn those notification bells on, comment down below what you think about this medical examiner or what you think about the Commonwealth not using Dr. Stonebridge and using this other neurosurgeon guy. Tell me in the comments below. I will see you guys next time.